we'll launch into our panel now, and it's going to be about the Esports Expansion, how technology, audience, brands and audiences are changing the face of gaming. So I'd like to invite Peggy and Salz from MobileGroove, James O'Leary from ICO Partners, Lirui Ding from Transcend Fund, Eric Bernofsky of Enthusiast Gaming, and James Dean is back on the stage. So yeah, looking forward to this one.
It's a long day, but this is exciting because this is like the coolest panel of the day, bar none, because it's all about opportunity. It's talking about how esports is expanding and who can get involved, and some great news on all levels. But let me start by introducing our panel. Yes, we introduced them, but I like to give people context. So starting with James Dean, we'll get to James, so we'll have to figure this one out. James Dean, founder and managing director of ESL, but what's really exciting, I didn't realize this, is the UK office operates the UK's longest running national esports tournament, the ESL Premiership, but importantly, holds the records for the largest ever online audience for UK esports tournaments. So there's a lot you can bring here. You're also, you started as a writer for a computer magazine, so you have sort of both hemispheres of the brain intact. And pretty cool, I was intact and using them, because we're going to tap both of them for this session. But also interesting, you have been watching this since the early 2000s. Not bad for a kid who I understand was banned from school for computer networking after installing games to play at lunchtime. So you're hardcore, James. Welcome. James O'Leary, marketing manager, but what we're really talking about is not your ICO partners. It's really what you do in terms of just like the impressive projects you've worked on. Dungeons and Dragons, Magic, The Gathering. So you're an esports commentator, working with the likes of Riot Games, covering League of Legends. So can I say a rock star, James? Welcome.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Most of my esports work is as a part of Riot Games, or I've worked with Epic on Fortnite, a bunch of different things. So 12 years of commentary. I met James 10 years ago. We were just reminiscing about this earlier today. So I may look fresh-faced, but in esports, I'm an old hat. I've been around the block a few times.
There you go. Well, that's Lirui as well. So Lirui Ding, senior associate at Transcend Fund, but also really hardcore because in addition to what he's done, he's a game industry veteran building digital entertainment companies, but more importantly, professional esports as well. So you have had your finger on the pulse for a while, continuing to look at that sector and going to tell us about that experience as well and bringing that experience to esports games. So it's great to have you, Lirui. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks. I'm probably one of the OG for the esports as well. If I think about my esports career, that was, more than 20 years ago. And I remember I started playing some computer games. I was doing relatively well, beating most of my friends. And I was like, began to go for some, let's say, citywide tournament, countrywide tournament, international tournament. And back then, I was 20 years ago, right? So I was always top 4 on lots of tournaments. Well, I mean, truth be told, when I say I was top 4, I mean, I was number 4, right? Otherwise, I would say top 3 or top 1. And it was pretty much a winner-takes-all industry back then. And, number 1 got about $1 million prize money. Number 2 got about $500,000. Number 3 probably got about $100K, which is still decent money. Guess how much I got, Peggy, when I was number 4?
I'm not going to try and guess. What?
I got a lot of the free mouse and free keyboards.
He got product. He got product. That's always...
And that was enough to keep you engaged. That's really something.
Indeed. I remember at my peak of my career, I had about 50 keyboards, 50 mouse in my bedroom, and that was basically my income for that month, right?
Yeah, back in the old days, you used to just win keyboards and then sell them, and that would be your prize money.
Exactly. Yeah. And then I did that for a few years, and at peak time, I got about 400 APM, which is basically I can click the keyboard and mouse like 6-7 times within a second, continuously doing that for about 1 hour, 2 hours. And when I was 25, I was pretty much like equivalent of 55-year-old in any other sports. I was basically too old, so I sort of retired as a failed esports player, and I didn't make enough money. I couldn't really afford a beachfront house, so I was like, okay, I should probably still do something for the game industry. And obviously, I wasn't very good at talking. I was quite shy, so I couldn't find a commentator job like James did. But I did end up working as a consultant for the game companies, and I was at Activision Blizzard for a while, and joining Transcend Fund as an investor now. So still in the game industry.
Well, that gives us a lot of great context to talk about what this industry is. I mean, when we were talking in prep, it was like, okay, it's expanding, it's bigger, but it isn't only esports anymore. I thought you've really embarked on an interesting discussion point of what is this really, because it's not necessarily what it was before, which opens up a lot of opportunities, but just as many questions. I'll start with you, James.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously did a bit of a presentation earlier, and I covered a couple of IPs there that I think are trying to push the horizon of what we see as entertainment. And if we think about all the sports we grow up with, it's all those moments where there's the winning moment, the team we love or the person who's playing, etc. And we're not necessarily a player of those sports. We just participate by appreciating the prowess of the players and the teams. So I think what fascinates me is how does live competitive entertainment really evolve? And what new formats are out there that allows us to really think about not just the player experience, which is primary one, because we tend to all be players of that game until we get older and we don't have time, or we're not very good at it anymore. But ultimately, how do we evolve? How do we get involved? Like, what's our experience as a viewer, and can we contribute? And I think that's gets really exciting, because eventually we end up making a gamified experience of the game we're watching, in effect.
But it makes me think, I was doing an interview with Mattel 163, and it was like, that was a massive tournament for a card game. And you just say to yourself, well, that can be card games, that can be just about anything. So that, I guess the message here is that there probably is or isn't, I don't know, but for me, I was thinking from the outside in, there probably is not a genre that can turn this into something in the way that it's live, competitive, and interesting, or is there?
I think inside esports, people about 2 or 3 years ago had this, what seems like a silly revelation now, but was a revelation at the time, where people went, wow, we're just entertainment. We don't need to just be esports. We can compete with Netflix, and we can compete with Amazon Prime, and then we can compete with traditional sports. And now everyone's like, oh, yeah, okay, but now we're actually competing with TikTok. Now we're competing with YouTube Shorts. Now we're competing with Instagram Reels. It's gone past the point of like, okay, we're doing the traditional sports thing. Now it's just entertainment as a whole. Every single moment that you're on your phone, you're on your computer, somebody somewhere is paying for your attention. And esports is breaking that next kind of step on a marketing scale. So it's a little bit less about genre. You mentioned cards. I mean, poker, World Series of Poker has been kind of like one of the benchmarks of what esports broadcast people have looked at for a while, which is this outside entity that isn't a traditional sport by nature, but it has a storyline to it. And if you have good commentators and they can tell a story, you can hook people in. But now people are looking past that. It's like, okay, who are your influences in the space? How are you actually capturing and holding people's attention? And the storytelling aspect of esports has stepped further than just 2 people or 2 teams playing a game. And now it has to be kind of all-encompassing of a team has to have such good content these days. There's short form, long form. You need to be able to care and invest in these esports teams and players. So the genre is almost insignificant these days. The genre is just wherever the river of video games is right now. I mean, it was MOBAs, it was Battle Royales. We're in a bit of a lull period where nobody's really latching onto the market. So it's whatever the next thing is will be the next genre. And that's kind of that $1 million question. If you can predict what that is before it sets in, you'll have the next Fortnite.
I was going to say, I definitely agree on that. One example came to my mind was as an investor ourselves, we're always actively looking for new opportunities within the esports industry. So this was like from a very, very small industry to now over $1 billion at least, and there are a lot of opportunities for us as investors and also for everyone here as the industry participants. And then I think we really need to have open-minded about what's the definition of the esports. So I remember they said, you talk about that, genre is almost irrelevant now. And I remember when I was at Activision Blizzard, and one of the really, really casual game was Candy Crush. And it was basically a match 3 puzzle game. People would never ever relate that to esports. But then what happened was Activision Blizzard had a tournament called the Candy All-Stars. It basically allows everyone to participate at a national level, and millions of players sign up to that event or that tournament. And after about 1 month of competition, and then they selected I think top 10 players to participate in that final game. I think on the stage, I think there was millions of viewers. So to some extent, that's almost like esports, right? I would argue, who would ever think a match 3 casual puzzle game, the main motivation for people to play was about relaxation, escapism, to now become part of esports.
Yeah. Nothing's become a part of the lifestyle more and more is, of course, mobile, right? We had our pandemic bump, whatever you want to call it. But we're in lockdown and we have maybe not a whole ton of space in the apartment or home. It's like everyone's on their device, and that stuck with us. But we're not really seeing the shift yet to mobile. What are we going to see in that transition, and what challenges, opportunities does that create? Because for one, it opens up a whole new opportunity in formats. Maybe you will be booked. Maybe you won't.
Yeah, maybe I'll get more work.
Maybe you have more work. I don't know.
The sad thing is I have to be the doomsayer now. It's like beware the Ides of March at this point, because mobile esports in what we call the West, which is not exactly the nicest name for it, which basically means Europe and America, we are in a rocky patch this year. Riot Games released League of Legends Wild Rift. It was meant to be their massive revamp of everything. Then they killed the esport in everywhere outside of Southeast Asia and China. So that was my job down the pan for a while. Lucky I have my day job with ICO doing marketing. But the important thing about that is we talk about not seeing the adoption. The reason we don't see it is because so much of it is centralized within markets like China, like Southeast Asia, India, Brazil. Calvin went through a little bit of the history about PC bangs in Korea and how they were important in the infrastructure of esports and how China uses mobile gaming. It's very similar in India, Brazil. A lot of the environments in which access to a lower cost phone doesn't prevent you from gaming. They become a primary video games device. So games like PUBG Mobile, COD Mobile, quite a few others that are specific to the region, Honor of Kings. There's many, many games that are on mobile in these regions specifically. They have massive, massive player bases. But over here in the West, people are stuck on whether it's consoles, PCs, however they want to play. They don't switch to their mobile yet for longer gaming sessions, and it's undervalued and underrepresented right now in the West. It's a hard sell to get people off console and PC games for an esports perspective towards a mobile. So there's a lot of growth opportunity there, but it's about breaking that mold first.
Yeah, and I think this sort of dwells on the point of changing up what the entertainment proposition is, right? Because ultimately, if you look on the player base, as you say, it's huge and it's growing across the world. Like, mobiles are so accessible. But if we then actually translate to how people are consuming the content of those tournaments, it's all short form, it's understanding progression, it's understanding a relation to your own gameplay. It's what can I get out of it and what can I contribute. So I think if we actually look at PUBG Mobile, for example, which arguably is such a similar game to the desktop format, or the PC format, that it kind of replicates it. But still, despite it being a very similar title or gameplay, it doesn't translate in the same sort of viewership and an ecosystem that we expect from the PC game. And I don't think that's because of interface. Interface is ultimately got to admit it's the best on a keyboard and mouse. However, if we now think about, well, what is the offering on an entertainment perspective, I think there's so much that can be done using different mobile platforms to say, here's this great gameplay. I think, you look at the TikTok numbers, or you look at Insta Shorts, YouTube Shorts, or Insta posts of videos. Like, it's incredible. And what we need to do is really understand, well, what is that proposition commercially? Like, how do we translate that into a real media value?
May I follow on from that? Because it's a proposition and an insane challenge in its own way. The proposition is you've got Gen Z and Gen Alpha, who are the primary consumers of this content. And they are the hardest to market to. They're brand agnostic generally, but there's one thing that they're traditionally less brand agnostic on right now, which is the biggest problem for mobile esports, is 83+% on the last survey I saw of mobile users in America use an Apple iPhone. Guess who doesn't sponsor anything other than the Super Bowl and MLS as of next year? Apple don't put money in. So unless you have a Samsung phone, which is the next 10% of the market share, you have no endemic sponsors to the mobile esports market. Whereas in traditional PC esports, James, you know this very well, you've got headset sponsors, keyboard sponsors. I'm sure you've sponsored teams and brokered deals in your day. You're paying for these sponsorships. Well, if most people want to play on an iPhone at home, and then the tournament organizer makes them play on an Oppo or a Samsung, well, then you've got no sponsorship acquisition. You've got no activation through a team. And that's the biggest challenge for investment in the mobile esports space specifically, is how do you get money into the scene? It's practically impossible outside of a few little areas that it can drip in.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. And I think the esports on the mobile platform, I think it's probably less common in, let's say, in London. But then I worked in Southeast Asia for about a year. I worked in Latam for another year as well. I got the opportunity to really see that, not just about mobile first, but mobile only platform. So in those countries, well, the disposable income is probably not even enough to buy an iPhone, then, justifying, another $500 or £500 for a PS5 or Xbox or a latest gaming PC is even harder. So lots of people, they will end up playing on their mobile phone because that's their only gaming platform. And then naturally, esports as part of the wider, the gaming, let's say, ecosystem, they really flourish or benefit from that. And I've seen a lot of that, mobile tournament happened at a much smaller scale in those countries, but it's getting a lot of momentum.
Speaking of momentum, what also is interesting is marketers, games companies telling me, thinking about this and saying, yeah, I want to be sort of esports friendly, but it's not an afterthought. It's an afterthought now when we see the action, but is there any way to be more proactive, more, I want to be esports friendly, because it can be live entertainment, it can be a lot of different genres, so there is an opportunity, but how do you sort of make certain that your game, that the IP, because you want to have a great experience, you don't want to ruin it, great IP, don't want to ruin it, but yeah, if we're going for shorter sessions, different audiences. James, what are your thoughts on that?
I think from a content creator, because there was actually a presentation earlier on which covered the mechanics of the most perfect esports game you could get to. In terms of making it esports ready, let's call it, from a content perspective, I think it's more around the tool set that is being built. So considering how can communities or individuals or companies take that IP and create a consistent business model around the playing of that game competitively to create that competition. And obviously there's technicalities in things like being able to get the observer mode so you can bring out the content or getting the statistics, etc. But I think as we move towards more of a B2C revenue model, it's also about sharing IP. It's about allowing IP to come out of the game, because game developers naturally are extremely protective of that. You cannot take a piece of IP in a game and take it somewhere else and put it into a metaverse, let's say. And I think Web3 might actually evolve that juxtaposition we're in, because that's all based on the idea of individuals owning that value And suddenly, if you now have an experience, a game that is allowing people to build that value in the form of their avatars and characters and profiles and achievements, etc., and then take that out and use it elsewhere, suddenly other companies and organizations and individuals and communities and all sorts of teams can monetize that, and hey presto, we're not worrying about sponsorship so much anymore. Yeah. It's a self-propagating business model that everyone is contributing to and benefiting from. But you have to argue with these massive, huge profits that are being made right at the top there, because naturally people are going to be very protective of that.
Well, there is the point, though, because we're talking about the expansion, and one is the role of the community. I mean, there are communities that say to themselves, oh, well, that game isn't an esports game, so we're going to make it into one. I mean, you don't want to stop that. You want to harness that. What are your thoughts, James, about bringing the power of the community into this? Because they might make up for some of the companies that aren't seeing it. You know, when you have an audience, when you have eyeballs, you have a different way of leveraging what you have and your IP.
Yeah, community, it's funny, we look at, and it's very, very true, we look at community building in gaming as a specific industry, as if it's separate from other things. And I've spoken to so many people that don't necessarily equate team fandom with community building in the same way that a football team would, in that way, where esports community only exists as long as you can hook people into your brand or your team. If that's a game, that's because they either play the game or they like watching the game, or the other one is that they've watched the game for long enough they don't want to stop watching the game. That generally is like that long time hooked in thing where it becomes generational. But if you're an esports brand or a team and you're not able to activate your fan base to buy merchandise, support players, whether it's watching their streams, buying merchandise, their sponsored products, and directly linking it to sponsors, if that aspect of community isn't there, it's very difficult to survive. And it's the type of thing that teams have started to realize over the last few years through their wallet, more than just feeling it kind of passively. There are very few teams actually making money. That's the thing that nobody in esports wants to tell you. A lot of teams spending a hell of a lot of money, not a lot of teams making a lot of money. They might be breaking even at best, but without merchandise sales, there's no real way of having a community prop up the game. So that sounds very doom and gloom. It sounds dismal.
Thank you for ending the day on this happy note.
No, we can bring up the hype, because with that comes those moments in sports and traditional sports that people will latch on for a lifetime. We saw it in the first esports presentation of the day, those moments that are clippable and shareable. The moments that you think from watching sports 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I'm a wrestling fan, so I have memories from 20 years ago of, it's a meme now, but Mankind getting thrown off the top of Hell in the Cell. I can picture that vividly in my mind. Well, there are esports moments like that. Those of you that are League of Legends fans in here will know that there's a moment where the greatest League of Legends player of all time, Faker, took to his first game on the stage, won a Zed one versus one against his opponent, and it's one of the greatest moments in League of Legends history. And anybody that is a fan of Faker or SKT or League of Legends that has watched esports has seen that clip probably 400 times now. And that's the community that sticks around in esports that doesn't necessarily rely so much on money.
Yeah, and I was going to add, another thing is it's really important for the game companies to realize the role of esports play in terms of the community, in terms of the player engagement or re-engagement. So example for me, could it be that, you know, I played a lot of games in the past, now I stopped playing that particular game. But now, you know, after watching esports content, I said, okay, actually that's interesting, you know, maybe I can go back and play that, you know. I learned some trick from that video. I want to go and try it, and I become, you know, another, you know, re-engaged player. And I think this is the thing the developers or the game studios need to recognize. It's quite different from, let's say, traditional sports. So, for example, like if I saw some, you know, really cool video or tricks on World Cup by Messi, let's say, it's very rare. I would say, maybe I could do that as well. I wouldn't really go back and try to replicate that, but I think esports is very different. Yeah.
I bring up an interesting point because I was talking to Play Magnus not long ago, and it was the whole idea that What's interesting about this is also education is a play. It's part of it. It's not just like watching the players. I mean, there are people who love chess and will watch that, but it's more important like the master classes. How do I get better at this? What am I doing here? How can games companies latch on more to that as well? Because that is part of what is going to be the hook. We either hook them on the live excitement of it all, or we hook them on sort of like the, you know, the backstage of it all and the education. James, you were going to say something, I feel like.
Yeah, I think first of all, if we look at a lot of the esports ecosystems set up, especially on a national level, it is a platform for people to learn, not just playing, it's to better themselves across the whole landscape of creativity and content creation and casting and all the rest of it. I think that's really important. But then also I think from a data perspective, we're dealing with a sport here which is pure in data, which is very exciting. We actually worked on a government R&D project which was all about creating fan experiences through AI technologies and analysing the data. And it was a very large project we did with University of York and some big broadcasters in the UK. And one of the best use cases we started to really explore was the idea that as you're watching a particular match, whatever it is, by plugging in your own player data, you can now start comparing your performance with the performance. And you can't do that really in traditional sports, but gaming allows us to do this fantastic stuff. And it could be all sorts of data points we can analyse. And I really love that because you then start to feel really involved and you might improve from that. Or you might just have a bit of fun with that. Or maybe you might look at the what-if scenarios and say, oh, well, if they played it differently, what would I have been right? Would I have made the right decision? And what's my chances of winning in that circumstance?
I think the technology innovation really helps that, like James said. I remember when I was a professional esports player, basically for every game I played, I always watch the replay at least 3 times. So the first time, I always watch it from my perspective, and then like you said, you know, okay, how can I improve? How can I do things differently? And then the second time is actually to watch from my opponent's perspective, think about, that's what he did. Oh, okay, that's something I didn't realize. Okay, that's how I lost. And then the third would be the what-if scenario, like you said. Now I know the mistakes I made. Now I know the moves of my opponent. Can I do things differently, you know? And then back then it was all very manual because there wasn't, you know, such a clever tool, all this big data analytics, all the AIs. So I ended up watching lots of the replays, and also I was writing lots of notes on basically on a piece of paper, say, on 2 minutes and 30 seconds I did this. Next time I should do it 1 second earlier. But that's nothing as advanced as these analytics James talk about. Yeah, I wish I was 10 years younger, right? I mean, we all wish we were 10 years younger.
We all do that.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is there's massive player engagement already at multiple levels, and they're excited. But of course, what we're seeing now in our climate, where entire teams are just like, yeah, I'm ready for this, and then no, there's no team, there's no game. It's pulled. You've seen it yourself in your work, James. What does that tell us about how to show commitment? Because if games companies are showing that commitment, then it's going to be, well, this is a smaller tournament, or it's a different type of tournament, but I'm here for you, and if you spend the time to figure this out, and to play this, and to perfect, your craft, it's here for you.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, a lot of esports companies decided that they would show commitment by charging each team like $20 million for a spot, and then everyone will share the money and it'll be great, and we'll make a lot of money in the end. That has not worked out in the way they wanted it to. Surprise, surprise, surprise. I was optimistic at the beginning, to be honest. There was a moment. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out in a very productive way in that regard. But I think what people learned along that journey, though, is as the gaming industry has moved from a single box game to games as a service, or free to play as it used to be called, to battle pass structures. It's more about continuous engagement and player retention, and then revenue sharing with esports. I was talking to Calvin a little earlier, who did the presentation just before this, about how Rainbow Six have team merchandise within the game, and then that's rev shared with the teams. It's not the first time we've seen it, but certainly these things peak and trough at different times. That's one way that a solid esports ecosystem can at least be propped up for a little while. It is top heavy though. If you're a team like G2 Esports, who are the biggest European esports team in the world, great for you. Like, European esports team in the world. That's a strange way of putting it. They make a lot of money off fans in the game. If you're a smaller organization, if you're the 10th place team in a league of 10 teams, then you're not going to make as much, and you're going to make very small amounts off that money. So it is still top heavy. Again, that goes a little bit back towards that community building aspect. It's about sharing commitment with the fans, the teams, and the publisher at the same time, which is a very difficult thing to actually balance. Because at the end of the day, the publisher wants to make money, the teams want to make money, and that means it's tricky to strike that balance. But that's where it comes from somewhat.
Yeah, and I think if we think about this extension, or the gaming as a service, the primary way of making revenue is selling in-game items, digital assets, etc. That
NFTs.
Of value,
right.
to the to the community, and I think what we have seen very successfully in most circumstances is where the community or the players are getting something by contributing towards something they want to watch. So. We saw it, the Dota 2 International is a great example where 25% of those winnings are put into the prize. The revenue is put into the prize pool, and every year it tends to go up because the community want to prove out. They want to see this, and they're getting digital value back. So it's actually just selling more game in effect, which is works very well with their business model. But you have to also be careful with that because that's a contract with the community. You're saying we're going to deliver this if you do this, and I think we saw an example with WoW, I think it was, where they committed to $500,000 in prize money minimum, and the way it was worded made it sound like that's the lowest level, but the community generated far beyond that. And then, of course, when it came to the prize money, they were like, hang on, where's all the rest of the money? Like, we don't pocket it. That's ours. And I think it's providing that value back. And as long as that reciprocal relationship exists, it can scale from the smallest, newest games. We actually launched a few much smaller esports, if you like, a few years ago. One I love as an example is old school RuneScape, where you still have several 100,000 people playing that game very regularly. And when we spoke to Jagex about developing out a competitive format, we came up with this concept of last man standing. We called it the final hour. That was the broadcast, and it was based on a simple seasonal idea of building up your character and then just going for it and seeing who's left. And obviously they've got their factions, and 200,000 people play the game, 200,000 people watched the tournament, 200,000 people re-entered, and they generated very good revenue from that, which more than paid for the whole tournament. So call it a content marketing activity that's actually generated revenue. I mean, this is companies like Red Bull are very good at, right? So I think there's so many positives to actually scale from a very small level.
If you sort of do it in
just
steps.
reciprocal value.
Yeah, it's interesting, James, you mentioned that, those are small-scale esports tournament or even like small-scale games. Because if I think from, professional player perspective, at the very early beginning when I think about what esports game I want to play, there are always two options. One is definitely to go to the one that is most, recognizable games, has the biggest community, has the most viewership, because, basically the prize money is there, and if I win, I'll have a lot of reward, financial reward, and all the fame, etc. So that's one way to do it. But essentially, I will become like a small fish in a very big pond, and although the infrastructure is there, the prize is there, but also a lot of competition out there. So every single possible move I can ever think of, someone has already done it twice at least. So it's very hard for me to win. And another way to think about that for another type of the games is to going for a smaller upcoming games that has not really been that popular yet. And then this one, although the money is not there, but I may have a higher chance of winning it. And then if I can grow together with the game, the upside and the potential is huge. And also I feel like on those smaller games, you probably have, I wouldn't say control, but let's say, your feedback might be quite vital to that game. If you say, this is a really imbalanced, probably like developers are probably like quicker to respond to you. So I think, you mentioned those smaller scale games. I think that's a very interesting point. Yeah.
I love, a good example, Company of Heroes, after, the developer actually just ditched it completely, turned off the server. The community found out a way that they would still run tournaments and carry it forward. And they were generating £20,000-30,000 every single time they built it. And I think that's just so good to see that passion. And
that's organic audience.
That's organic.
Love. You cannot buy that.
Authenticity.
Authenticity.
I think the thing is, I think we get stuck in this idea of getting that sponsorship revenue. I think the tournament needs to stand on its own 2 feet without sponsorship. It needs to, and if you get to that, anything is possible.
Great. I'm just mindful because we were going to take some questions, and we probably have some back here, where I can continue. I'm just making sure. Okay, because they said take time for questions. We can continue. We can rock on. There is a question in the back. Yes. Take it there. Oh, you got better eyes than I do. There you go.
So I wanted to ask. So you mentioned obviously Company of Heroes. So looking at esports just slightly outside of the mobile scene, what would be the kind of view on something like the fighting game community? Like Street Fighter, Tekken, Guilty Gear, for example.
Do you want to take that, or should I? You go for it. So anybody that's followed esports for a while knows the fighting game community always want to push back, but they are perhaps the most dedicated esports that there actually are, and passionate. They will show up even if it means lugging a fight stick through the rain. Like, it doesn't even matter. I've been to so many fighting games events that are like the coolest events ever, and I think intrinsically though they want to stay relatively underground, and I'm not an expert on the fighting game scene in myself, so I'm sure there are much more qualified people to talk about that. But what I will say is that passion you can't buy. Like in the way you were saying, similar to the Company of Heroes thing, like there are so many passionate fighting games fans that don't particularly want to be tarred with the same brush as esports, which is why if you watch EVO, the biggest fighting games tournament of the year, it doesn't look anything like the rest of esports, and I love it. I love watching it. They can not be esports if they want. I'll watch it and love it as an esport myself.
Just to add maybe an interesting fact or story was, I played some of those fighting games myself, like Street Fighters and King of Fighters, and I totally agree with you that those fans or those players are really, really dedicated. And I remember I was saying, basically there was a player, and he beats me every time I play against him. And I just I couldn't find any possibility to beat him. So I was like, okay, if I can't beat him, maybe I should learn from him. So I basically, stalked this player for about a few days, and literally like wherever he went, I went next to him. And I saw him basically like doing these controls, like, back then there was like controllers, and he was doing this, like, when he was like not doing anything. And I was like, I thought that was probably like, sort of like trauma after, playing that games for too long, but actually he was practicing it. Even if he was already like a very, very top tier player, and he was like doing that, well, he got a bit of free time. It's kind of like, footballer will just, kick the balls, wherever, they got us to see a ball. He was doing that all the time, Yeah, that takes a lot of dedication.
But that's also one of the reasons why fighting games players have a little bit more longevity. In the same way that Counter-Strike players have more longevity than people say MOBA players, you're done at 25. It's not so true, but fighting games players and shooting games are a little bit more muscle memory. I once lost to somebody playing Street Fighter 4. They played one-handed, I played two-handed. That was pretty embarrassing. But at the same time, we saw a screen grab of the clip from Street Fighter, I think it was Third Strike, Daigo versus Justin Wong, the clip from earlier, which was just like that amazing moment. Both of those players still play professionally. So it's all about muscle memory and just that insane amount of practice, hours and hours and hours and hours of dedication. I love that about the fighting games community. It's great.
That is the tribe. Any other questions? No? You're just, okay. I think we're nearly near time. Yeah. So can I have one last question though? Okay? Because that was what I want to do. I want to say, okay, this is why I love this panel, because I love opportunities and the ones that you don't see. So the opportunity is live entertainment is a broad opportunity, broad definition. A lot of genres can get involved. You don't have to go for big. You've got a tribe. You can make that into something. And you don't necessarily go for prize and experience when it's, again, part of that community. So there's an opportunity there. Say something inspiring at the end of the day so people understand that they can open the aperture of how they view this and go out and maybe do something Monday morning about it.
I would encourage anyone, and I see it all the time, no one can own esports. Mm-hmm. No, even the IP owner cannot own esports. And we're in a space where, you know, people are trying to think about regulating the space, or big conglomerates are trying to own that area. At the end of the day, if you believe in it and you've got an idea and you've got access to, or you want to build a community, it will work if you go for it.
All right, something inspiring. James, last word.
Inspiring thing, if you're in marketing in any way in this room or are interested in esports, don't look at the NFL, don't look at Premiership football, look at things like, I don't like necessarily a lot of the content, but the amount of energy that was created by the Prime energy drink in like basically Gen Z and Gen Alpha, that most people are like, who's KSI? If you're older than me, they're like, I have no idea who these people are. But if you look at the energy that they created and the amount of people they drove to go and get product, drove out and just energize their fan base, you want to be looking at those types of communities. Look at what Gen Z, Gen Alpha are actually watching and consuming, market towards that in a positive way. Don't try and be traditional sports. We are past that boundary, especially for mobile esports. So there's a lot of undriven road there that there's time to capitalize on.
Huge blue oceans. Lirui?
And then, speaking of the blue ocean, I think there are a lot of opportunities ahead of the esports. Game market is give or take about 200 billion. Esport is just a little bit over $1 billion. So there's a significant opportunity there. There are only 3 billion gamers in this world, but there are 7 billion population. Again, there are lots of opportunity there. I also think there are a lot of the innovations are happening in the industry and on different fronts. So, for example, Transcend, as an investor, we invest in a company called Stress Level Zero. And their latest game, Bone Lab, don't quote me on it, but I believe hold the record of fastest selling VR games on Quest platform. So there are lots of innovation there, which is why we are all very excited about the topic today. And the last thing, if I may say, is if any of you here are thinking about organizing an esports tournament, speak to James. If you're looking for commentators, speak to this James.
Get business. Business.
You're not on commission.
Yeah, if you're looking for any early stage game investment, do come talk to me. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for an inspiring talk. Thank you, my panel.